Welcome, dear friends, to the Crimson Academy's course on God Passes By. In this section, we're going to have an introduction to the book God Passes By the beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi. God Passes By is, in the words of its author, a survey of the outstanding events of the century that has seen this spirit, the Bahá'í Faith, burst forth upon the world. It was the one book the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi wrote in his lifetime that was neither directly addressed to the Baha'is, expounding on subjects related to the faith, nor a translation of an existing text in Arabic or Persian. With characteristic precision, the guardian refrained from referring to his survey as a detailed history of the first 100 years of the Baha'i era. He was content to call it a review of the salient features of the faith's birth and rise, as well as of the initial stages in the establishment of its administrative institutions. In his introduction to the work, George Townsend describes it as a history of our times, written on an unfamiliar theme, a history filled with love and happiness and vision and strength, telling of triumphs gained and wider triumphs yet to come. The theme on its human side, he writes, is that of love and struggle and death. It tells of men and women like ourselves, adventuring all they had and all they were for sheer love's sake, of desolated homes, of breaking hearts, of bereavement and exile, and suffering and indomitable purpose. The book was published in 1944 to commemorate the first centenary of the Baha'i Faith. To give an idea of the monumental nature of the task Shoghi Effendi undertook in preparing his survey, one has only to consider certain basic statistics. The work consists of 412 pages in all, including quotations from sacred scripture, scholarly treatises, and other sources. Of these 41 pages are quotations covering an entire page or more. Scattered throughout the rest of the book, we find about 47 pages worth of further citations, bringing the total of pages where the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi is quoting other sources to over 85. Ria Khanum in The Priceless Pearl gives us a glimpse of Shoghi Effendi's meticulous research and overall vision of the book. The method of Shoghi Effendi in writing God Passes By was to sit down for a year and read every book of the Baha'i writings in Persian and English, and every book written about the faith by Baha'is, whether in manuscript form or published, and everything written by non-Baha'is that contained significant references to it. I think in all, this must have covered the equivalent of at least 200 books. As he read, he made notes and compiled and marshaled his facts. Anyone who has ever tackled a work of an historical nature knows how much research is involved, how often one has to decide, in the light of relevant material, between this date given in one place and that date given in another, how backbreaking the whole work is. When all the ingredients of his book had been assembled, Shoghi Effendi commenced weaving them into the fabric of his picture of the significance of the first century of the Baha'i dispensation. It was not his purpose, he said, to write a detailed history of those 100 years, but rather to review the salient features of the birth and rise of the faith, the establishment of its administrative institutions, and the series of crises which had propelled it forward in a mysterious manner through the release of the divine power within it, from victory to victory. He revealed to us the panorama of events which he wrote the revolution of 100 years has unrolled before our eyes, and lifted the curtain on the opening acts of which he asserted was one indivisible, stupendous, and sublime drama, whose mystery no intellect can fathom, whose climax no eye can even dimly perceive, whose conclusion no mind can adequately foreshadow. It was the beloved guardian's intention to present the Baha'i world with a valuable gift at the anniversary of the declaration of the Bab, the first comprehensive look at the events marking the emergence of the faith from its humble beginnings in Persia to its status as a truly world-embracing religion. His purpose, he insisted, was not to ignore the swift interweaving of seeming reverses with evident victories, out of which the hand of an inscrutable providence has chosen to form the pattern of the faith from its earliest days, but to reveal the process of crisis and victory that characterized the fortunes of the Bahá'í Faith throughout its history, and which would continue to shape its progress in the future. The history of the first 100 years of the faith's evolution, he explains in his foreword to the book, resolves itself into a series of internal and external crises, devastating in their immediate effects, but each mysteriously releasing a corresponding measure of divine power, lending thereby a fresh impulse to its unfoldment. The conditions under which he labored to produce God Passes By reflect this very pattern of triumph and reversal. The book was written while he was under great strain from factors within and without the Baha'i world. This was a time when the Nazi regime was carrying out the mass extermination of the Jews, the Gypsies, and other populations across Europe, when its armies were engaged on both the Western and Russian fronts, as well as in North Africa, when Japan and America had both joined in the hostilities, turning the Second World War into a planet-wide conflict. It was also a period of great personal loss for the beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi, due to the activities of covenant breakers within his own family. Rih Khanum paints a picture of these circumstances in The Priceless Pearl. Shoghi Effendi, although crushed and overburdened from the weight of 20 years of guardianship, when the tides of World War II threatened to sweep over the Holy Land and engulf him and the world center of the faith in one catastrophic flow, during a period when his home was convulsed by the repercussions of covenant breaking now affecting his own family, set himself the task of appraising for all time the significance of the events of the first century of the Baha'i era. She further writes in her diary, as Shoghi Effendi sat working on God Passes By, 2 army fighter planes in practice flight touched wings, lost control, and crashed. One coming down over the roof of our house so low I thought it would shear through the ceiling of Shoghi Effendi's room. It landed and burst into flames not 100 yards at the foot of the street. And again, concerning the activities of covenant breakers in Haifa that time, she noted, they, the master's family, have gone a long way to crushing every ounce of spirit out of the guardian. On rare occasions, she recalls, it was my misfortune to see him weep as if his heart would break. So great was his agony, so overwhelming the pressures that bore down upon him. The work of writing involved such a major project, was of course itself burdensome to the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi. How many hundreds of hours? Ruy Khanum tells us Shoghi Effendi spent on reading his sources and compiling his notes. How many days and months in painstakingly writing out, in longhand and often rewriting, the majestic procession of his chapters. How many more wearisome days he sat at his small portable typewriter, hammering away with a few fingers, sometimes 10 hours on end as he typed the final copy of his work. And how many more hours we spent late into the night, when the daily typing was over, seated side by side at his big table in his bedroom, each with 3 copies of the typescript before us, proofreading, making corrections, putting in by hand the thousands of accents on transliterated words which Shoghi Effendi would read aloud until his eyes were bloodshot and blurred, his back and arms stiff with exhaustion, as we worked on to finish the entire chapter or part of a chapter he had typed that day. It had to be done. There was no possibility of working at a slower pace. He was racing against time to present the Baha'is of the West with this inimitable gift on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the inception of their faith. In spite of the fact that he mailed off to America the corrected manuscript in installments, conditions in the United States delayed the publication, and the book was not off the press until the middle of November 1944. Due to the pressures in his life, at the time of writing God Passes By, the Guardian was unable to fine-tune the text to the extent he would have desired. He made use once more of the services of George Townsend, sending the manuscript in installments to his friend with the request that he make editorial corrections and suggestions. David Hoffman describes the conditions of their collaboration. God Passes By was undertaken during difficult times, the darkest days of the Second World War, when communications were far from regular, normal help was unobtainable, and both men were under great strain. In addition to making editorial suggestions, Mr. Townsend was asked to write an introduction to the book. Hoffman observes, having read every line of the Guardian's monumental work, having gloried in it, wept over it, lived with it from February 1943 to February 1944, offered his editorial suggestions, criticisms, or corrections, as he deemed necessary. He wrote with a full heart and flowing pen. Shoghi Effendi also requested Mr. Townsend's input on the choice of a title. It took Mr. Townsend some time to come up with an appropriate idea. After letters and 2 cables from the Guardian, he finally cabled back 3 words, quite simply, God Passes By. He received an immediate answer, delighted title, eagerly awaiting letter. Townsend makes the following comments on the range and impact of Shoghi Effendi's centenary history. Whatever it holds of darkest tragedy, it leaves mankind at its close, not facing a grim, inhospitable future, but marching out from the shadows on the high road of an inevitable destiny towards the open gates of the promised city of eternal peace. In an undated letter to the Guardian, he notes that hitherto our information on the history of the faith has been piecemeal and uncertain on many points. Now, an even light covers it all. We are left with an enduring legacy, a vision of the first 100 years of Baha'i history that is both far-reaching in its scope and concise in its execution. Ria Khanum further describes it as the most brilliant and wondrous tale of a century that has ever been told, and the mother of future histories. A book like God Passes By, she observes, is a veritable essence of essences from this single 100-year history. 50 books could easily be written, and none of them would be superficial or lacking in material. So rich is the source provided by the Guardian, so condensed is his treatment of it. The beloved Guardian, Shoghi Effendi, divided the book into 4 periods, focusing the first 3 respectively on the ministries of the Bab, Bahá'u'lláh, and Abdu'l-Bahá. The 4th section deals with the start of the formative age. He then added a short epilogue entitled Retrospect and Prospect, in which he gives an overview of the main highlights of the first century of Baha'i history. And each section we summarize for you. In the ministry of the Bab, the beloved Guardian describes the impact of that short and dramatic period on the lives of those professing the Bahá'í Faith and on the public consciousness and political climate of Persia. He outlines the chief events between the declaration of the Bab in 1844 and his martyrdom in 1850, and the resulting aftermath that led to Baha'u'llah's incarceration in the Siyah. The beloved Guardian summarizes the chief episodes related to the lives of outstanding Baha'i disciples, extols their heroism and character, and places their achievements in the context of the relentless opposition and bloody persecution visited on them by the civil and ecclesiastical authorities of the nation. The beloved Guardian begins with an account of the declaration of the Bab and the enrollment of the Letters of the Living, the Bab's arrest after his pilgrimage to Mecca, and his subsequent imprisonment. He describes the conference of Badasht and the intervention of Baha'u'lláh in that famous gathering. Shoghi Effendi then addresses the all-important subject of the Bab's writings during his captivity in Azerbaijan, including the composition of the Bayan, the revelation of the laws and ordinances of the Baha'i dispensation, and the references to him whom God shall make manifest. He explains the opposition of the clergy to the new ideas promoted by the Bab, their denunciation of his teachings, and the resulting martyrdom in Mazandaran, Neyriz, and Tehran. Shoghi Effendi goes on to depict the events surrounding the execution of the Bab, the parallels between his life and that of Jesus Christ, and the tributes paid to his memory by writers in the West. He portrays the circumstances attending the attack on Nasruddin Shah and the wave of imprisonment, torture, and massacre that was visited on the Baha'i community as a result of that misguided act. Lastly, Shoghi Effendi notes the role played by His Holiness Baha'u'lláh during the Bab's ministry, and gives an account of the arrests and martyrdoms of the remaining prominent disciples of the Bab, as well as the eventual fate of the principal enemies of the Bahá'í Faith. And in order to capture some of Shoghi Effendi's insights on this vital period, we share some extracts. In sheer dramatic power, in the rapidity with which events of momentous importance succeeded each other, in the Holocaust, which baptized its birth, in the miraculous circumstances attending the martyrdom of the one who had ushered it in the potentialities with which it had been from the outset so thoroughly impregnated, in the forces to which it eventually gave birth, this 9-year period, the ministry of the Bab may well rank as unique in the whole range of man's religious experience. The heroes whose deeds shine upon the record of this fierce spiritual contest, involving at once people, clergy, monarch and government, were the Bab's chosen disciples, the letters of the living and their companions, the trailbreakers of the new day, who to so much intrigue, ignorance, depravity, cruelty, superstition and cowardice oppose the spirit exalted, unquenchable and awe-inspiring, a knowledge surprisingly profound, an eloquence sweeping in its force, a piety unexcelled in fervor, a courage leonine in its fierceness, a self-abnegation saintly in its purity, a resolve granite-like in its firmness, a vision stupendous in its range, a veneration for the Prophet Muhammad and his Imams disconcerting to their adversaries, a power of persuasion alarming to their antagonists, a standard of faith and a code of conduct that challenged and revolutionized the lives of their countrymen. In the second section is the ministry of Bahá'u'lláh. In the Beloved Guardian's overview of Bahá'u'llah's ministry, Shoghi Effendi focuses on the principal events marking the years of exile and imprisonment that characterized the last half of Baha'u'llah's life, years that saw the open and far-reaching declaration of his mission and the establishment of his faith outside Persia. Shoghi Effendi explores the influence and impact of Baha'u'llah's behavior and writings on the minds and hearts of those around him, from the body of his followers to the government officials and eminent intellectuals of his time. The Beloved Guardian addresses the nature and import of the different tablets comprising the vast body of revealed text authored by the founder of the Bahá'í Faith, and draws particular attention to the prophecies and religious traditions of the past that found their final consummation in the appearance of Baha'u'lláh. The Beloved Guardian, Shoghi Effendi, begins by depicting the events following the martyrdom of the Bab, and the confusion and despair that assailed the remaining adherents of the Bahá'í Faith. He recounts the first intimations of Baha'u'llah's mission in the Siyah-Chal, his exile to Baghdad, and the transformative influence of his presence on the people of that city, both within and without the Babi community. He explains the machinations of Baha'u'llah's enemies within the ranks of the clergy, and the resulting edict from the Sultan ordering his continued banishment, and gives an account of the declaration of Baha'u'llah's mission on the eve of his departure from Baghdad. The Beloved Guardian further describes Baha'u'llah's exile to Constantinople and Adrianople, enumerating the tablets to the kings and rulers of the world which Baha'u'lláh revealed during his stay in those cities. He relates the attempts on the life of Baha'u'lláh at the instigation of his half-brother Mirza Yahya, the consternation and division this open antagonism produced in the Baha'i community, and the use that the enemies of the newborn faith made of this internal division to convince the Sultan to issue a further edict banishing His Holiness Baha'u'lláh to Akka. He gives a description of Baha'u'llah's incarceration in the most great prison, the gradual relaxation of the restrictions imposed upon him in succeeding years, and his final sojourn in the mansion of Bahji. The beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi summarizes the astounding volume of his writings during those last years, including the Kitab-i-Ahdas and the tablets which supplemented the Most Holy Book, and explains the range and import of these writings. He describes the events leading to his ascension and finishes by chronicling instances of divine judgment visited on the enemies of the faith during Baha'u'llah's ministry. Dear friends, we share with you some extracts from this section. The revelation identified with His Holiness Baha'u'lláh abrogates unconditionally all the dispensations gone before it, upholds uncompromisingly the eternal verities they enshrine, recognizes firmly and absolutely the divine origin of their authors, preserves inviolate the sanctity of their authentic scriptures, disclaims any intention of lowering the status of their founders or of abating the spiritual ideals they inculcate, clarifies and correlates their functions, reaffirms their common, their unchangeable and fundamental purpose, reconciles their seemingly divergent claims and doctrines, readily and gratefully recognizes their respective contributions to the gradual unfoldment of one divine revelation, unhesitatingly acknowledges itself to be but one link in the chain of continually progressive revelations, supplements their teachings with such laws and ordinances as conform to their imperative needs and are dictated by the growing receptivity of a fast evolving and constantly changing society, and proclaims its readiness and ability to fuse and incorporate the contending sects and factions into which they have fallen into a universal fellowship, functioning within the framework and in accordance with the precepts of a divinely conceived, a world unifying, a world redeeming order. The writings of Baha'u'lláh during the Akka period, as we survey the vast field which they embrace, seem to fall into three distinct categories. The first comprises those writings which constitute the sequel to the proclamation of his mission in Adrianople. The second includes the laws and ordinances of his dispensation, which for the most part have been recorded in the Kitab-i-Ahdas, his most holy book. To the third must be assigned those tablets which partly enunciate and partly reaffirm the fundamental tenets and principles underlying that dispensation. With the ascension of Baha'u'lláh draws to a close a period which, in many ways, is unparalleled in the world's religious history. The first century of the Baha'i era had by now run half its course, an epoch unsurpassed in its sublimity, its fecundity, and duration by any previous dispensation, and characterized, except for a short interval of 3 years, by half a century of continuous and progressive revelation, had terminated. The message proclaimed by the Bab had yielded its golden fruit. God's newborn faith, the cynosure of all past dispensations, had been fully and unreservedly proclaimed. The prophecies announcing its advent had been remarkably fulfilled. Its fundamental laws and cardinal principles, the warp and woof of the fabric of its future world order, had been clearly enunciated. The covenant designed to safeguard the unity and integrity of its world-embracing system had been irrevocably bequeathed to posterity. The promise of the unification of the whole human race, of the inauguration of the most great peace, of the unfoldment of a world civilization had been incontestably given. Dear friends, in the third section is the ministry of Abdu'l-Bahá. In his outline of the ministry of Abdu'l-Bahá, the beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi, deals with his function as center of covenant and head of the faith. The distinguishing features of his career and the revitalizing effect of his unerring guidance on the fortunes of the Baha'i community. Shoghi Effendi describes Abdu'l-Bahā's character and accomplishments, the arrival in the Holy Land of the first pilgrims from the West, and the establishment of a rudimentary institutions of the faith in various countries under his tutelage. He singles out 2 of Abdu'l-Bahā's seminal works, his Will and Testament and the Tablets of the Divine Plan, for specific mention. Finally, he relates numerous episodes recorded from the life of the Master that exemplify the astounding influence he had on those who met him. The beloved guardian first explains the significance of Baha'u'llah's Book of the Covenant, lists its salient features, and recapitulates the role played by Abdu'l-Bahá during the ministry of his father. He gives an account of the defection of Abdu'l-Bahā's half-brother, Muhammad Ali, and describes the shameful conduct of the covenant breakers within his own family, machinations which culminated in the summoning of 2 commissions of inquiry into Abdu'l-Bahā's activities by the Ottoman government. He alludes to the impending judgment on Abdu'l-Bahá based on the report of the 2nd commission, his release from incarceration after the Young Turk Revolution, and the final transference of the remains of the Bab to a mausoleum specifically erected under his direction on the slopes of Mount Carmel. The beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi further describes the early development of the faith in the West, depicting Abdu'l-Bahā's travels to Europe and America. He underlines the importance of these journeys, the impact that Abdu'l-Bahā's presence and person had on his audiences, and the ensuing advancement of the faith in those countries. Shoghi Effendi notes the continued persecution of the Baha'i community in Persia. He describes the construction of the first Baha'i house of worship in Ishqabad and points out the effect of the First World War on the conduct of administrative affairs in the Holy Land. He mentions the recognition of Abdu'l-Bahā's services by the British government after the war. And lastly, he recounts the passing of the Master, reiterates the significance of his ministry, and relates the fate of his few surviving opponents. And dear friends, we're going to share with you some extracts from this section. To direct and canalize these forces let loose by this heaven-sent process, and to ensure their harmonious and continuous operation after his ascension, an instrument divinely ordained, invested with indisputable authority, organically linked with the author of the revelation himself, was clearly provided and was clearly indispensable. And that instrument, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh had expressly provided through the institution of the covenant, an institution which he had firmly established prior to his ascension. During these travels to Europe and America, Abdu'l-Bahá displayed a vitality, a courage, a single-mindedness, a consecration to the task he had set himself to achieve that excited the wonder and admiration of those who had the privilege of observing at close hand his daily acts. Careless alike of his comfort and his health, expending every ounce of his energy day after day, from dawn till late at night, consistently refusing any gifts or contributions towards the expenses of his travels, unfailing in his solicitude for the sick, the sorrowful, and the downtrodden, uncompromising in his championship of the underprivileged races and classes, bountiful as the rain in his generosity to the poor, contemptuous of the attacks launched against him by vigilant and fanatical exponents of orthodoxy and sectarianism, unequivocal in his glorification of Baha'u'lláh at all times and within the sanctuaries of diverse sects and denominations, adamant in his refusal on several occasions to curry the favor of people of title and wealth both in England and in the United States, and last but not least, incomparable in the spontaneity, the genuineness and warmth of his sympathy and loving kindness shown to friend and stranger alike, believer and unbeliever, rich and poor, high and low whom he met. He, the incarnation of every Baha'i virtue and the embodiment of every Baha'i ideal, continued to trumpet to a world sunk in the materialism and already in the shadow of war, the healing, the God-given truths enshrined in his Father's revelation. Dear friends, the fourth section of God Passes By is the inception of the formative age. In his survey of the period immediately following the ascension of Abdu'l-Bahá, the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi addresses the essential elements of the Baha'i administrative order, details its uniqueness in the annals of religious history, and examines its lawful basis in the will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá. He characterizes the formative age as a period of gradual development, when the faith and its institutions, through a process of organic growth and alternate stages of crisis and victory, will lay the foundations for the appearance of Baha'u'llah's golden age. The beloved guardian enumerates the achievements of individuals and communities in the fields of teaching and administration, applauds the formation of assemblies on a sound constitutional and legal basis, and underlines the importance of the official recognition of the faith. Shoghi Effendi begins with an explanation of the nature of the administrative order, based on the provisions of the will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá. He then describes the attacks by covenant breakers on that newly established order after the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá, and their inability to halt the steady march of development of the institutions of the faith. The beloved guardian mentions the inauguration of the Mother Temple of the West, listing endowments, publishing houses, summer schools, and other agencies associated with the nascent Baha'i institutions. The beloved guardian recalls the persecutions suffered by Baha'i communities in Russia, Germany, and Persia, emphasizes the significance of an edict issued by ecclesiastical authorities in Egypt, formally pronouncing the faith an independent religion, and praises the official recognition of Baha'i institutions in the United States. He further catalogues the accomplishments of individuals and national communities in the field of teaching, making particular reference to the services of Martha Root, and notes the particular contribution of the American Baha'is to the spread of the faith across the world, executing the mandate of Abdu'l-Bahá in his tablets of the Divine Plan. And dear friends, we'll share with you some extracts from this fourth section. The covenant of Bahá'u'lláh had been instituted solely through the direct operation of his will and purpose. The will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá, on the other hand, may be regarded as the offspring resulting from that mystic intercourse between him who had generated the forces of a God-given faith and the one who had been made its sole interpreter and was recognized as its perfect exemplar. The creative energies unleashed by the originator of that law of God in this age gave birth, through their impact upon the mind of him who had been chosen as its unerring expounder, to that instrument the vast implications of which the present generation, even after the lapse of 23 years, is still incapable of fully apprehending. The administrative order which this historic document has established, it should be noted, is, by virtue of its origin and character, unique in the annals of the world's religious systems. No prophet before Baha'u'lláh, it can be confidently asserted, not even Muhammad, whose book clearly lays down the laws and ordinances of the Islamic dispensation, has established authoritatively and in writing anything comparable to the administrative order which the authorized interpreter of Baha'u'llah's teachings has instituted, an order which, by virtue of the administrative principles which its author has formulated, the institutions he has established, and the right of interpretation with which he has invested its guardian, must and will, in a manner unparalleled in any previous religion, safeguard from schism the faith from which it has sprung. Nor is the principle governing its operation similar to that which underlies any system which the minds of men have devised for the government of human institutions. Neither in theory nor in practice can the administrative order of the faith of Baha'u'lláh be said to conform to any type of democratic government, to any system of autocracy, to any purely aristocratic order, or to any of the various theocracies which mankind has witnessed in the past. It incorporates within its structure certain elements which are to be found in each of the three recognized forms of secular government, is devoid of the defects which each of them inherently possess, and blends the salutary truths which each undoubtedly contains without vitiating in any way the integrity of the divine verities on which it is essentially founded. In the 5th section of God Passes By, Retrospect and Prospect, the beloved guardian, in his epilogue, reviews the major episodes marking the history of the faith in the 100 years since its inception, and looks forward to aspects of its future development. The beloved guardian characterizes the advancement of the Baha'i Faith as a process God-impelled, mysterious in its workings, awful in the retribution meted out to everyone seeking to resist its operation, infinitely rich in its promise for the regeneration and redemption of humankind. The beloved guardian notes that despite the blows leveled at it, whether by the wielders of temporal and spiritual authority from without, or by black-hearted foes from within, the faith of Bahá'u'lláh has gone from strength to strength during the course of its first 100 years, and always emerged whole and victorious from any crisis that assailed it. Indeed, its history, he writes, resolves itself into a series of pulsations, of alternating crises and triumphs, leading it ever nearer to its divinely appointed destiny. The beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi's overarching understanding of the faith's history and his far-reaching vision of its future may be glimpsed in a few quotes that we share with you. The tribulations attending the progressive unfoldment of the faith of Bahá'u'lláh have indeed been such as to exceed in gravity those from which the religions of the past have suffered. Unlike those religions, however, these tribulations have failed utterly to impair its unity or to create even temporarily a breach in the ranks of its adherents. It has not only survived these ordeals, but has emerged purified and inviolate, endowed with greater capacity to face and surmount any crisis which its resistless march may engender in the future. Mighty indeed have been the tasks accomplished and the victories achieved by this sorely tried yet undefeatable faith within the space of a century. Its unfinished tasks, its future victories, as it stands on the threshold of the second Baha'i century, are greater still. Whatever may befall this infant faith of God, in future decades or in succeeding centuries, whatever the sorrows, dangers, and tribulations which the next stage in its worldwide development may engender, from whatever quarter the assaults to be launched by its present or future adversaries may be unleashed against it, however great the reverses and setbacks it may suffer, we, who have been privileged to apprehend to the degree our finite minds can fathom the significance of these marvelous phenomena associated with its rise and establishment, can harbor no doubt that what it has already achieved in the first 100 years of its life provides sufficient guarantee that it will continue to forge ahead, capturing loftier heights, tearing down every obstacle, opening up new horizons, and winning still mightier victories until its glorious mission, stretching into the dim ranges of time that lie ahead, is totally fulfilled.